Hello there. Thank you so much for joining us on today's edition of Joy Asonye Live. It's wonderful to know you're back there. But today is special in Nigeria, being the 15th day of January. It holds significance because it marks the surrender of Biafran troops to the federal troops in 1970. Now, this event marked the end of the civil war, which aimed to divide the united Nigeria at the time. The civil war, which lasted from the 6th of July 1967 to 15th of January 1970, also known as the Biafran Nigerian War or the Biafran War, was a civil war fought between Nigeria and the Republic of Biafra, a secessionist state which had declared its independence from Nigeria in 1967. Nigeria was led by General Yakubu Gowon, while Biafra represented the nationalist aspiration was led by Lieutenant Colonel Chukwuemeka Odumegu Ojukwu. He felt at the time, or the leadership of the Biafra at the time felt, that they could no longer coexist with the federal government that was dominated by the interest of the Muslim Fulani or Muslim House of Fulani of the northern Nigeria. We'll be discussing all of this, including how the reconciliatory efforts to ensure that we move away from that. We discuss the literary development and evolution around this work. How much history do you know around this very monumental event that happened in Nigeria? Would also get to a book launch that tells a story of a certain tribe in Nigeria. It promises to be very interesting, but we'll go for a very short break to return to discuss more. My guest is seated, so we'll get to the crux of the matter after this short break. Welcome back. Now in the studio to discuss all I had mentioned earlier in my opening is Agụ Prince Osinayah. You may know him as the Happy Prince. He's a poet and a performing artist. Thank you so much for being part of the program.
Thank you, Joy, for having me.
There's so much to unbundle on today's edition, but let's start with the history of it all. Does it concern you that when you meet a young person now and say, today is Armed Forces Remembrance Day, they say, oh yeah, I saw people gathered there, but I don't know exactly what's going on. Does it concern you, or is it what to expect?
Yeah, of course, it should concern every Nigerian that we are commemorating the end of an era, and also that we're remembering heroes who either fell on the battlefield or have exhausted their time of service, and or the ones who are still serving. Where the Nigerian military is running operations on several fronts in the northeast, and then of course in the southeast and the west, all over the country. So I think it's a very important event in the history of Nigeria that should concern every Nigerian.
And yet here we are with our history and young people getting in line and all of that. Well, let's move to more serious issues right now, and I'm talking about the Biafra war came to an end. Unfortunately, when you look at Nigeria as it is, there are still those who are agitating to have that.
Yeah.
Means reconciliation really didn't happen, or those indices that made people in the first place think Biafra, those indices are still in place. Or what is going on in your thoughts? Okay,
what is happening is not abnormal, because there will always be dissenting voices. However perfect a system is, there will always be things that will fall out of place, and of course when you're dealing with human beings, interests will always align and fall out of place. Yeah. So I think that that Nigeria has not really done what it's supposed to do about the war. I think Nigeria should have a conversation about the Nigeria-Biafran war. The reason I say that is this: if you see, the world is built on stories.
Yes.
And like Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie would say, if you don't tell your story, other people will tell it for you.
And it will be their narrative.
Yes, and of course, it's also said in history that the victor, the one who conquers you, will always tell the story, and that is why we have these stories about colonialism. I mean, Joseph Conrad wrote, a story about a book, The Heart of Darkness, and of course, thank God that Chinua Achebe was able to write back, in that essay, So, and if that was the only narrative, of course, there are people before Joseph Conrad who wrote those things about black people. But if that was the only narrative that was allowed to, to continue, maybe today we would even be looking at ourselves differently. So I think that Nigeria's refusal to tell the story, to take ownership of the story of the Nigeria-Biafran War, has made a lot of people to step in. And that is why today you have lots and lots of books, even by some of the people, actors, especially some actors and the 1966 coup, the one of 15 January. Some actors there, and also actors during the counter coup have all written stories about it. But has Nigeria as a state been able to write a story? Nigeria has not been able to, and I think that Nigeria needs to write a story. No, but when you say
Nigeria as a state, what do you mean? Nigeria as a state to write this story? You mean the federal government with all the resources in its arsenal?
Yes, Nigeria needs to come and write about the story. If the president, it's as simple as the Nigerian president coming out and giving an address about the war, and maybe set up a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The Oputa panel was set up, and it addressed several other issues. That is why you could hear of conversations about what happened during the MKO Abiola, why Major Al-Mustafa was there. But it was not, there were some actors during the war and during the coup, the first coup were there, also featured, but it was not specifically for the Nigeria-Biafran war, right. It was just national healing. But I think that if we want to get it right, we need to trace the story and own it, bring people together, bring the North, the South together, or the same way they sat at the table during amalgamation, bring them together and say, hey, we need to push this forward, but we need to solve this problem of disunity. So I think that Nigeria needs to push that narrative.
So what's stopping it? In other climes, it's not necessarily the government that comes up. When it comes to storytelling, it's not the government that comes up. There are literary minds that will come up and tell the story. They would get to archives, research, and do a lot. What is keeping us? I mean, private individuals such as yourself that know this history, that can get this history, tell it the Nigerian way. Tell it how, and make it as relatable as it can be. What's stopping all of that? Won't it sell?
Before I get into that, another way that Nigeria can tell the story is by building maybe a memorabilia, for the war. I know there's a cenotaph somewhere in Enugu, but that is not national. We have to put a symbol. I mean, if you go to Rwanda has a memorial of the 1994 genocide. You go to Japan today, the Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the nuclear bomb incident, they have a memorial there. In fact, that flame has been burning for decades. You go to the US, the 9/11 attacks, they have a memorial to it. And these are not things that remind people of the pain. These are things that remind people that we are still here, that despite this, we are still here. And may this never happen again. I think that's what is written on the Japan
Hiroshima memorial, right?
May we never have, just paraphrasing that. So then, what is stopping it from happening? I think it's some kind of fear that if you push this narrative, that it's going to cause disunity, and of course people are going to go back to the past and begin to act. But I don't think it is the same way. In fact, the fact that we're not telling this story means that Nigeria is not as fully united, as we push it to be. We need to the North needs to forgive the South, the East. The East needs to forgive the North. And of course, the West needs to, of course, play its role there. Let's have this and have it done so that we can move on as a people.
Okay, well, in terms of reconciliatory efforts, but for this memorabilia, am I getting that word? So, but for what would give this insignia of this peace, what other efforts of government? Because it's more important now than it has ever been to have this reconciliatory effort. We still have people who are so divided in thinking, or the way they even engage with the person from the other part of the country. So what else, what other efforts would you want, especially this administration is quite new. Nigerians are beginning to see where it's going really. So what would you want them to start doing and start doing immediately?
I go back to storytelling. The National Orientation Agency,
right,
needs to, of course, in fairness to them, there have been certain narratives that have been pushed out in the past about national unity, but they are not typified, adverts. So it's just blanket adverts. But I think that what we need to do is, for the National Orientation Agency, let's have conversations. Let's have conversations about the war. Let's bring people, some of the people who, unfortunately, most of the people who were very active in the war, like in terms of frontline leaders, most of them have died. But we also have those that are still living.
We have General Yakubu Gowon is still alive.
So we need people to bring people together. Let's have these conversations. Leaders will go back, talk to their people. Let there be one of the things that is one thing that is making the younger, my generation, to sometimes when you hear about the war and all that, is because we did not experience the war. I mean, if we experienced the war, you won't be talking about war if you experienced war.
Exactly.
And that is why if you check, most of the people who experienced war do not want it again. I have an uncle who experienced war. He was there. He fought in the Nigeria-Biafran war. In fact, he still has bullets inside of him. Wow. And it affected his hearing. So if you talk about war to him, he will tell you to go and sit down. Because he experienced it.
Exactly.
So I think these are some of the narratives that Nigeria needs to put out there through the National Orientation Agency and other sundry agencies of government to take ownership of that story.
Right. It's also very dicey. You don't want a story that is told and given the narrative that one section of the country was dominated by the other. And how do you balance this story so that it doesn't elicit more anger and violence?
Tell the truth.
Okay. Tell
the truth. There were wrongs on both sides. It wasn't it wasn't a one-sided story. There were wrongs on both sides.
Could this be the reason why a lot of the leaders will say, let it be?
But for me, that's the more reason we should tell it. I mean, if you tell the story of the Rwandan genocide, for instance, you see between the Hutus and the Tutsis, you could see that there are wrongs on both sides, but there is also that imbalance. The imbalance in the whatever ills that were meted out. But it depends on how. In fact, one strategy that Paul Kagame used, president of Rwanda, was the strategy of forgiveness. So you see someone who, because some of these guys were known, some of the guys who wielded machetes and were killing people were known.
Known, exactly.
So you see someone who murdered your father or your mother, and then the person is brought in front of you, and this person is asking you for forgiveness, and then you forgive the person. What could be more powerful? So I think that what Nigeria, like I said earlier, what Nigeria lacks is forgiveness. We need to forgive ourselves, and the only way that can be, I believe, one way that it can be done is for Nigeria to tell this story, and let's begin to have conversations about the war.
Well, conversations have indeed begun about the war, and when we come back from this very short break, we'll get into those conversations, those stories from whatever aspect, and we need more of it. I mean, it affected everyone in Nigeria, but somebody has done something about it. We'll be back to discuss more about who has started telling the story. We'll be back. Welcome back from that short break. Like I said earlier, we're going to some people have told the story of the Civil War. Indeed, everyone has a side of the story, and that's what makes it very unique, because everyone experienced it differently. And when you go into art, that is indeed art, telling the story your way. And today we'll also talk about a book that will be launched tomorrow. It says the title of the book is Ofia Became Home. Ofia became home. I like witty statements like that. And this novel, according to the writer, is a true story of the displaced persons of Igbere. The displaced persons of Igbere. Well, my guest, who has been giving us a good background as to the Civil War and how storytelling can indeed bring about the reconciliation we so longed for. Agu Prince Osinayah, the performing artist you know as Happy Prince. Well, he's here and he will be telling us a bit about this book and why this story was indeed told, although the book is written by Ndukwe Uche. But you are Ndukwe Uche's person, so I'm sure you have a good synopsis in your head as to why this book had to be written.
Well, Engineer Ndukwe Uche is someone I consider a father and a friend. I met him about 6 years ago, and when I was the president of the Aba Poetry Club, which I founded in 2017. And in 2019, he assisted us to host the Aba Literary Festival. So he's someone who has been invested in the literary scene, even though he had over 34 years of experience working in the oil sector. He worked with Shell for 34 years. So these are not his. This is not his first book. He has had other books. In fact, he wrote one of his early books was in the 80s. And I think he won an NBC award at the time.
Wow, that's huge.
Yeah. So the book Ofia Became Home is a story, a real life, a personal account of the effect of the war. Because one thing with storytelling about the war is that, like you said, people tell it from different angles based on experience. And one of the things that we often do not talk about the war is also how the war affected communities.
Right.
You know, the war cost the people of Igbere some kind of displacement. You know, because the people were running for their lives. So this is the author telling the story. You know how it happened. Of course, during the war, his primary education was
thwarted or
yes,
stopped.
and so there was he was punctuated, and then he had to continue. You know, after the war. So like other children in the south, in the old eastern region, that was the story. So I think what makes this particular story unique and different from other story books by Chinua Achebe. You know, there was a country Chinua Achebe wrote that was also a personal account. I think what makes it really unique was the fact that it is based on the experience of a people and not just the individual who
right.
did that. So I think and tomorrow, of course, we'll be having a book chat and introducing the book to the Abuja audience.
Right. Now, is it one of those books and those kind of literary works that you have been advocating for? Let's tell this story. Would you say that it serves the purpose?
Yes, of course it does. And like I said, it introduces a uniqueness, a unique aspect of that storytelling. Because what we often hear is that, oh, there was a war, but people are not talking about how it affected people in Enugu, exactly. A community in Enugu, like my village, my town of Obuoka in Enugu State. You know how it affected people there. I know my uncle would tell us, and my dad would also tell us how it happened. My mom would tell us how because my mom was a little girl during the war. So she would tell us how, based on what she remembered, you know, how it was, how they ran how the jets would come and hover very low, and then they would, those stories. But we've not really had it documented. It's just in the mind. So reading this book also brought a lot of flashbacks for me based on the things that I've heard about the war. And that is why I say that is also why I say that the Nigerian government needs to take ownership of that narrative. Because if, for instance, my uncle whose hearing was affected, if he tells you about, in fact, when he told us about the war, his experience during the war, we were very bitter. I mean, it's natural. It's natural,
exactly,
to be embittered. And then you have somebody in Sokoto, and the uncle was a Nigerian soldier, and then he tells him about the war, and
from that perspective, they'll be bitter too.
And probably he lost a limb. So how do you fix that? So it's you see people acting on secondary information, and they are pushing it. But if we have a narrative by the Nigerian government, it brings me closer to this man in Sokoto and says, hey, your uncle has been hurt, but this man also lost his limb. Lost a limb. Right. So the losses will cancel out, and we have gains. So that is why I think that Nigeria needs to tell this story. It shouldn't be from the angle of denial. I often say that Nigeria is a country that denies its truths. Nigeria is a country that denies its truths. So can we get, and the Nigerian Civil War is one of our truths. We cannot throw it away. It happened.
Wow. Now, what would you say a proper Armed Forces Remembrance Day should look like? Because year in, year out, same old things. You bring out the read, there's a speech about our fallen heroes and how we all honor them and all of that. But that ends there. The problems we have still continue. So what would you say would be a proper celebration of the Armed Forces Remembrance Day?
I think a proper celebration of the Armed Forces Remembrance Day is the kind of celebration that will happen in every home in Nigeria.
Every home?
Yes. We should be able to, as a country, carry at every point in time, carry our men and women of the armed forces in our hearts, in our prayers, have them there, and it should be something that when you talk about a soldier, you're proud. When you see a soldier, a Nigerian soldier, you're proud that you've seen a Nigerian soldier. Not when you see a Nigerian soldier, you are afraid that he's gone, might go off. So I think that we need to change. That's also part of the narrative that needs to change. Because there's a lot of civilian aggression out there, aggression against civilians, by men in uniform. Some men in uniform, not
some
all.
Men, you're right
some
about
men
that.
in uniform. So I think that needs to go away. So I think while I was I used to be part of this civil society military group where we visit military in their offices and have conversations about with them. I think those sort of groups, more of them should be set up so that people even understand what the military are doing. There are some of them in these communities that even do projects for communities, and people don't even know. So I think the media also needs to push those stories so that people know that, hey, these guys are here to protect you, they are not here to kill you. I also think that from the angle of the government, that better remuneration for these guys. These guys are, they're in bushes, they are everywhere. I think we need to sue for better remuneration for them, better conditions of service, so that somebody does not, because it's the mind. You see a soldier, he's behaving in a certain way. He's taking out his frustration on you, because he looks at you. You are an ordinary civilian,
probably earning so much
like some of them would call us, and probably this guy has been in the bush for months and he has not even eaten good food. And then you come and you're talking to him anyhow. He looks at you, and you just rose from your bed, took your bath, and this guy may not have taken his bath for months. So sometimes we members of the public should also be patient with them. how you talk to a soldier and all that. Personally, I don't engage beyond in any unreasonable manner, because I know it is the mind that is working.
Of course, it is the mind that is working, and these are times when we bring about the welfare of the soldiers, the fallen heroes, and when you look at the deplorable state at which their family members, after they are long gone, live in, it's quite unfortunate, and it's very sad to think about. But this is all the reconciliation that has to happen, because it's not just about the civil war now. Young children are growing up to say, my father passed away doing serving Nigeria, and this is where I have been left. You know, these are all the reconciliations. Do you think this government has would have that kind of body language? I mean, it's said in the speech, I listened to the president earlier, and it was all about improving the welfare of families of fallen heroes and those living, honoring them and all that. But we've had several excuses and assurances.
We'll keep hearing them.
So you are just as skeptical as the rest of Nigerians.
Well, well, for this government, like with every other government, the government has come, before them. I prefer to be optimistic. We can't afford to be pessimistic at this point in Nigeria. Whether you voted for the president or not, you have to be optimistic, and know that something good is going to come out of it. Because if it works for you, it works for your neighbor, we have a better country.
We do.
So I think with respect to the affairs of our servicemen and women, that we need to do more. A lot of things have been done in the past. I remember that there was a mental health center that was launched. I don't know if it was eventually built, but I know that the former chief of army staff, that the wife, chief of defense staff,
right.
and I think the wife had launched a mental wellness facility for members of the force, because we are talking about this. There are issues of PTSD that we're not even talking about, and somebody goes to is fighting Boko Haram, and he sees all that horror, and then he comes back and he's reunited with his family immediately. I think that I think that's an anomaly, because the person a gun can go off in the midnight and it's in the bedroom, and there are casualties. So I really think that we need to do more. I remember the last time that I think the PRO was talking, and he was talking about the budget, the fact that the budget for defense isn't much, compared to, because of what the dollar is saying these days, right. And the forex and all that. So I think that we need to do more in terms of funding, in terms of their welfare, and the military leadership also need to do more for their people.
Indeed, they need to. But let's go to those still seeking secession, especially in the northeast. What would be your talk? I mean, this is the day to actually have that conversation, and a lot of people have died in the process of all of this. Businesses are being stifled. I think in some areas, I don't know if that's still going on. The Monday sit at home is still enacted. If you do not, you are flogged. Some are even beaten to.
It's still enforced.
It's still enforced. Let's have that conversation. What would be your suggestion to those people, and what should this government start doing just to ensure that there is peace and productivity among everything? I mean, the East is often known for it's always a commercial hub. Every part of the East has something they're trading. So what is your suggestion?
It still goes back to what I said earlier. There are conversations that we need to have, but I think the deputy speaker of the House of Reps is
Benjamin Kalu.
Yes, Kalu is doing something. I think there's a piece in the Southeast project that has been trending, and I think that's a very wonderful move. But in reality, I I think that the Nigerian government knows what it will do in when it comes to the peace in the southeast. A man has been under detention. The courts have said release him, and the man is still there under the DSS. And the man is the reason that we're having all these groups are coming up with these ultimatums and this, which are illegal. By the way, some criminal elements have taken that opportunity to start carrying arms in the southeast. In fact, we've seen some very deplorable videos, which is very unfortunate. Imo State used to be a very before now used to be a very horrible place for security.
Yeah.
Some parts of it still is. The same thing in Abia State. I think that what the Tinubu administration needs to do is to release Nnamdi Kanu, and do whatever negotiations that need to go on. Have that conversation. There is nothing. I don't think there's anything wrong with having that conversation. There needs to be that conversation, because this is someone who, whether we want to talk about, whether I want to accept it or not, apart from Chief Odumegwu Ojukwu, we never had that kind of leader in the Southeast. Right. Somebody that when he moves to everybody, people close their shops, people are seeing, there's this messiah complex. You can't, whether you want to criticize it or whatever it is, it's a reality.
Yes, exactly.
It's a reality. And the one thing you do with this sort of thing is to use whatever it is that you, whether I want to call it a poison or you want to call it a cure, you want to use it to quench that fire.
Exactly.
So I think that that conversation needs to be had. He needs to come out of detention, and I think that if he does that, there will be some peace in the southeast.
There may be some peace, but there's the argument that he is the #1 pusher of this secession agenda. So is there a possibility of that kind of meeting or engagement with him that would quell that secession or start a what would I say now?
Another thing is this. I think that's that narrative also needs to be
corrected,
need to be pushed aside. The reason is this, because it's a stop. When you push that narrative, it becomes a stop. People who listen to Nnamdi Kanu, his videos are all over the internet.
Yes, yeah.
So when you listen, you see that the push for secession was based on certain conditions. That if so and so thing, and what is he talking about? It's talking about education. It's talking about better deals for the South. It's talking about infrastructure. And this is not, I condemn anything about secession. But those are the conditions that I feel that he was pushing, and as motivation. After all, this guy was rooting for Goodluck Jonathan. I mean, we saw the video now. So it's not like he started this from the genesis of his life. So I think that we need to have that conversation, not just the federal government, the governors of the Southeast, because whether you like it or not, President Tinubu is not the governor of Abia State. He's not the governor of Anambra State. He's not the governor of Enugu Ebonyi State. These people are people from the Southeast. So I think that because what happened in the past, especially during the Buhari era, was that push of blame to the federal to the center. But these are people that are close to the people. What is the local government administration doing in those places? And I'm saying the South is like I'm saying for other places in Nigeria. So I think it's a situation that has been created by an irresponsibility in governance. Right. And I think we need to fix it.
Well, going back to these very important books that will be launched tomorrow, where, when, and how can people listening to us right now, and how can they participate in this?
So the book launch is at Adam's Pages.
Adam's Pages.
Yes, and it's we're having a book chat actually. It's not a launch.
It's a book
it's
chat.
a book
I
chat.
apologize. I apologize. I'm so
chat.
used
The
to.
book has been out since 2021, published in 2021. So it's the author is based in Canada, and we're doing the book launch of the book chat.
You see, you're also joining to confuse me.
So
the book chat.
So 2 books. We have Ophia Became Home and Ahead Another Poems.
Right.
We'll be having the wonderful Salamatu Sule, sit down with the author tomorrow at Adams Pages to discuss the book. We'll also be having Hussein Zaguru, who will also be the MC for the day and all that. And there will also be performances. I will also be performing at the event.
Ooh, I would like to be there to watch you. but what time is it?
It's by 3 p.m. It's by 3 p.m.
Okay. Well, it's been an interesting one. I urge everyone to go for that book chat, you say.
Yeah.
Book chat. It's Nigeria. We often do not get book chats where you get to even meet the author, you get book signings and all that. But it's a good one. I should ask you, how come that's not very popular? Book chat.
Adams Pages have been having book chats.
Oh, really?
Been having book chats in Abuja. And there are also book events. I mean, Abuja Literary Society has, okay, for Abuja Literary Society, it's called a book jam. So there is
jam. Maybe that is what confuses me.
A book is featured and then they read. Sometimes you don't have the author. Most times you don't have the author there. But today, for tomorrow's event, the author will be there. And then we have the Abuja Literati come in and listen to him talk and also ask questions, about the book.
Wow, that is so interesting. I would be there, and I urge my followers and those watching us right now to ensure they are there as well. Promises to be interesting. You get to know about what informed this book and lessons to learn from all of that. Well, this is where we would draw the curtains on today's edition of Joy Asonye Live. We've been discussing with Ago Prince Osinayah, the Happy Friends. Thank you so much for being part of the program and sharing such rich insight into Nigeria, really. It's been interesting. My name is Joy Asonye. Until tomorrow when we come to you with another interesting edition, do have a restful evening.